No, I mean, architecture is political. We gotta add that stuff.
Indeed.
We're tearing down communities to build multifamily, and you have to understand we are creating displacement. You're displacing Black and brown folks, and they don't come back.
Half of this podcast would be dedicated to the history of Tyler House, my journey and my discoveries, and hey, I'm gonna solve this housing problem.
Hey guys, what's up? My name is Melissa Daniels. This is the Architecturalist Political Podcast where Black and brown folks talk about architecture. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and be part of my storytelling. It was 2012 where I had a bright idea of doing a women architecture series. At the time, I was in the Emerging Professionals Committee at AIA, and I had the brilliant idea of, hey, why don't we do a women's series? And they're like, sure, go right ahead. That's one thing I do appreciate about AIA is that when you have the bright idea of doing something, they just let you do it. So I told my mentor at the time was Barbara Laurie, and she loved the idea. She was like, yes, she was gung-ho. She supported me. And I started gathering names and topics. I had a bunch of women supporting me in this. And in 2013, the first series started. It was 4 lectures. And then the fourth one was like a networking event. It was high tea. And it was at, I believe it was Steelcase showroom. It was fun. It was topics that I wanted to talk about. The first one was business of architecture. The second one was citizen architect and the impact of social change. The third one was family and architecture. And the last one was a high tea social. The website is still up, by the way. It was a WordPress website. And I'll put the link in the show notes for you to just check it out. The first lecture in 2013, Business of Architecture. It was all held at SmithGroup in DC, the DC office. And at the time, my mentor passed away. And her name was on the list to attend. She bought a ticket. She wanted to go. She was excited. And it was difficult to move on from that. 2014, it was so successful. 2014, did it again. At the time, SmithGroup moved to their current location. I think they're still there now. Brand new office. And I was like, we need to phone in people because there were topics that I couldn't find people for within my network. And then I caught wind of the survey out in San Francisco. And we were able to Skype or WebEx Rosa because it was about the missing 32%. And from that day on, I kept in touch with Rosa. And then the missing 32% morphed into Equity by Design. So I've known Rosa for about 10 years. That's a long time to know somebody. And it's a long time to know somebody and you still like them. I need to preface that. You gotta like the person to keep in touch. Anyway, getting together with these ladies has been emotional for me. And I had so many ideas about how to do this intro. I did this intro like 15,000 times. And one idea I had was, and then, fellow podcasters out there, please, if you want to do this, please do. Just have snippets of people and just talk about how Equity by Design changed their lives. Because it changed mine in so many ways because I lost my mentor. And even though I have support, it was good to know that I have even more support, I guess, in the career sense. I have friends. I consider them my friend. And then I have people to network with that will help me career-wise. We don't have to be like besties, but you get what I mean. I was recently on the Architect Debt podcast with Caitlin, and I reference her name, Caitlin, in this episode a couple of times. So shout out to her, where I talk about the current state of women in architecture, I guess. It kind of just morphed into that conversation. But I have some words to say. And the reason why I feel this way is the same reason how I felt 10 years ago. And that's why I started the Women Architecture series. I feel that our trajectory these past 10 years in our industry has done the roller coaster a little bit. I felt like the 2010s was the resurgence of women in this profession. And then the pandemic hit, as well as other things that hit. And so now that we're recovering from the pandemic, and in some ways COVID is still happening, where does women in architecture stand? Where does women stand? It's very interesting how we separate women in architecture, and then we have things like women in architecture. It's just interesting to me how we do that sometimes. It's like mom architecture. Can the two be together? Moms in architecture. Maybe I'm thinking too deep into this, but I just feel, again, it's my feelings. I have nothing to back up. I have no statistics to back any of this up unless someone takes a survey. And I could be completely wrong. And that's also part of podcasting. The problem with podcasting and the problem with social media is that there's a bunch of opinions with no facts, right? But I just feel that we're not getting into core issues. And sometimes I get it. You just want to have a good time. You don't want to be Debbie Downer. You just want to be uplifting and positive. And I think that's something that is desperately needed, especially now. But we can't ignore that there's a whole subset of Americans who don't want women to work, only want women to bear children, and punish those who don't have kids or have difficulty having kids or having problems while pregnant. We live in a country where they want to, and a woman that is assigned at birth those titles to procreate and be able to, depending on your race, sad to say, build this country either through labor or through wealth and power. I can't ignore that and go to work and do my job because it's intertwined. It's an everyday thing. It's certain things are on your mind. Certain things come up as you work in this industry. And I just feel that the way that we're moving right now, we're not reinforcing the solutions that Equity by Design put out. I shouldn't say solutions because it wasn't really solutions, but techniques, recommendations, guidelines, whatever the thing is, because diversity is being attacked. DEI is being attacked. Whole departments are gone that had the word diversity, equity, and inclusion in it. And we need to talk to people who believe that it should go away. And I think I am asking for too much because there's some things that can't be solved. And I think that the effort that these women have put into, and we do things habitually, like that power pose is forever ingrained in a lot of us. But what about the next generation who didn't get to sit in the symposium and hear the statistics? Now what? I rely on NCARB to tell me how many women are licensed or how many Black women are licensed. That's fine. I'm okay with that because I don't have the strength to run those numbers. And by strength, I mean time and money, basically. What I'm talking about here is an easy thing to solve. But at the same time, when we do have these gatherings of women, what are we talking about? What are we doing? Because we tend to get in routine. Every so often, we have to talk about salary negotiations. Every so often, we have to talk about increasing the numbers of women in architecture. And that's fine because you have the next generation to attend these things as if it's on the first time. But What about these other issues that's going on in the world that affects us all? I think what I'm getting at is we're doing the soft approach. We're doing the safe approach. We thrive on radical design where we're looking for something that's beautiful and abnormal and unique. We are being very routine, very rudimentary when it comes to us gathering. And I think one of the detriments is knowing the numbers. That's what I feel like, knowing the status of things, knowing that the pandemic did hurt us tremendously. A lot of people left architecture. A lot of people are leaving now. And again, I don't know this. I'm just saying this. I could be completely wrong in my assumptions, but we won't know because there's no numbers. I could be completely wrong. And the trajectory, the way things are going now is the things that we need. I could be wrong. And I will take my L. But talking to these women, I realized that they changed my life. I mean, I got a scholarship for the AREs, and I actually passed the scholarship was only for like 3 exams, and I passed those. I passed 2 out of the 3, which is enough. So I still have more to go. You could do the math if you want. But it was because of them. It was because of them I went to San Francisco for the first time. It was because of them that I met some awesome people there. It was because, again, that I learned what thought leader was, or intersectionality, equity, the true meaning of equity. And that image is totally ingrained in my mind. You know, that fence and those crate boxes and the short, medium, and tall person. That image is engraved in my mind because of them. So I hope that the Women's Leadership Summit is being recorded in September 2024. So in October 2024, when people go to Chicago to attend the Women's Leadership Summit, I hope that they recognize equity by design. I don't know if any of these women are attending, but you could do Zoom or just acknowledge them without them being there. It's fine. Women supporting women, it's a great example. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this. I've been holding on to this for a very long time. Interview was in June, and then I had vacation, and then I made like 15 intros, and I may do the other thing that I suggested, where interview people how equity by design impact folks. I think that's enough. I talk too much as is. I hope you enjoy it. I love this conversation. Here you go. Hey, everybody.
Hey there.
The audience does not know this, but I had to switch platforms to get 6 people on. I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves, starting with
Rosa, the founder.
Hello. Hello. I'm going to popcorn it over to Lillian.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's good to see you all. Happy 10th year's anniversary. My name is Lillian Asparin. I'm an architect in San Francisco and I've had the pleasure to meet this group and work with this group for the past 10 years. And little known fact, Rosa and I are within a mile from each other and live very closely to each other and stay in touch. So I'm going to popcorn over to Annelise.
Hi, y'all. Annelise Pitts. I'm an architect who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. I think I'm actually closer to Rosa today. She's on the East Coast, yeah?
Small world.
But yeah, I worked with these fine folks starting in 2013 and have been on the East Coast for about 5 years, but have stayed in touch with them.
Hi, my name is Julia Mandel. I am also an architect and live and work in Oakland in the East Bay in the Bay Area. And yeah, I got involved in very early 2014. And yeah, I've been involved ever since. I'm really excited to be together for some reflection.
I'm Antonia Bowman, and I am an architect, like everyone else here, pretty much. I live and work in the East Bay, in the Bay Area, and I got involved in the group in 2018. I first started volunteering for the symposium and joined the core team in 2019.
We are here to celebrate the 10th year anniversary of Equity by Design. I was curious as to how each of you got connected.
We actually inherited the missing 32% because there was a confluence and cosmic situation happening all at once, everything everywhere all at once, where there was the launch of Architect Barbie that was due to, in large part, of Kelly Hayes Micheloni and Despina Stratagaco, who are in the profession and realized that there was lack of women in the profession. And they thought, hey, if we get Barbie and Mattel to acknowledge Architect Barbie as the next profession, maybe we can raise this issue up. So they are successful, and AIA San Francisco's communication committee thought it was a novel conversation to have at the point in time because of a statistic that they found, which was approximately 50% men and women graduate 50-50 from architecture school. But by the time one gets into their mid-career, approximately 32% women drop from the profession. So only 18% or so are left, and even less in leadership positions. I think it was like less than 10% at the time that they started the conversation. And so it started off as a series of symposiums hosted by AIA San Francisco. The first one I actually missed. I attended the second one under the advisement and recommendation of Saskia Dennis-Vendil, who was one of the founders of our group. And she is an awesome advocate for the profession. At the time, it was my birthday. I was thinking about leaving architecture. I was going to become the missing 32% or one of them. And she convinced me not to. She said, you have so much to offer. I want you to come to this symposium about the subject matter that you're talking about. And I think you'd be great talking about negotiations. And it was my birthday, and I thought, that's really weird. Why would I do that on my birthday, especially when I want to leave? And she said, trust me, this will be good. So we had an amazing panel conversation about these challenges. And I realized that it wasn't just me that was struggling through a lot of these topics. So we made a commitment at that time to do something about it in the panel group, so Lori Dreyer, and we went to the AIA San Francisco and asked if we could start a committee about the lack of women in architecture. So that's the spring point. And I met Lillian, and I knew Annelise because she worked with me. So I just started asking people to join, and people started coming to the meetings, and Julia followed shortly thereafter. And many fond memories of people just coming to the table because they were all experiencing similar frustrations. Hope that kind of sums it up, but you guys can add more if you'd like.
Happy to jump in. So I still remember Rosa's outreach, and almost verbatim is, you seem outgoing. Would you like to do this with me? And I said, I'm not sure what we're doing, but sure, why not? And it was a very small conversation that we had. But in thinking back about the last 10 years, it resonated with me because, one, it was an authentic outreach, beautiful connection without knowing what would come out of it. And as I think about all of the most effective program pieces and engagements that we put together for Equity by Design, it just starts with simply that, a connection and a warm invitation to join. So it stuck with me. And as we continued to talk and become friends, we both realized that the difficulties were real. I was also having some personal challenges and struggling with a few questions that I didn't have a safe space to converse about. And not knowing what we would get into, I'd said, let's just start. And I think maybe that's probably the essence of our longevity as a group, is that we've always been committed to connection and support and vulnerability. And as we thought about the program, maybe we can talk a little bit later, but it was about hacking. Like, we have no time to wait for change. This is really affecting our time. And we started designing experiences that were really based on trust, vulnerability, and support. Julia was one of the people that said, sign me up. We're doing a symposium. I've got something to offer. I'll pop over to Julia. And I know that our research also was tag teaming with Annelise too. So why don't we start with Julia, and then your choice as to who goes next.
I knocked on the door super early and I didn't know anybody. I had just moved to the Bay Area and was starting a new job in a new city and had my own frustrations already, even though I was only a couple of years out of grad school and had already considered leaving the profession. And I actually heard about the missing 32% from a friend of mine from architecture school who had already left architecture, but was friendly with Lori Brown at Syracuse. And she sent me one of the early small press notices, and I literally emailed Rosa right then. And I came to the next meeting like 2 weeks later, and I never left. And that was early 2014. So the first survey and the first major kind of symposium effort were going on. As you were talking, Lily, and I was thinking one of the things we can think about more is why we've all done it for so long. You know, I mean, I thought about all these people who've come and they've done one of the kind of 2-year cycles, or they've done an event or this and that. And a lot of people have gotten a lot out of it, but there's been a mutual support and inclusiveness. Like I would say that even though this is a volunteer organization, these 5 people and Saskia, 6 people right here are kind of the best employment or professional collaboration I've ever had. So I kept coming back. That combined with the kind of clarity of thought and design over the years as we kept trying to make action happen has been really powerful for me and other people.
So I'm going to take it back just a little bit in time. So around the time you moved to San Francisco, I think, Julia, although I didn't know you at the time, I moved to San Francisco in May 2013. I was a year out of grad school. I was at a much fancier firm than the one that I had been at. And Rosa just happened to be my project manager. And at the end of my first week in this fancy firm that I found very intimidating, I just walked in every morning and went, who, me? You know, I go to a baby shower for one of the associates that everybody loves. And she's going away. It's her last day before leave. I see her in the bathroom. We're washing our hands. I go, hey, I'm so excited to be working with you. I'll see you when you get back. And she goes, oh, I'm not coming back. And that made me realize that these things that I knew that I wanted to do and be in the world, I always knew I wanted to be a mom, but I also wanted to be an architect. And it had never occurred to me because of the kinds of firms that I had worked in before that could be an issue. And I was with Rosa about this a little bit. She was telling me about her panel. Rosa's a sharer. I don't know if people know that. She's like, let me tell you about my weekend. This was awesome. Come to this meeting. Do you want to join? So I went to a meeting with Rosa, and the group as a team was writing the mission statement for this group. And I was so impressed by just the inclusiveness. And there was this thing that we all cared about. We were working on our own problems, but we made the mission intentionally to be expansive. I'm going to kick it to Antonia.
Well, I moved to the Bay Area in 2017. I'm trying to remember how I learned about equity by design, but I think it was probably not until 2018. Actually, a principal in my office at the time, Diana Hayden, told me about the upcoming symposium and told me, hey, you should get involved in that. Sounds like something that'd be up your alley. And I reached out and volunteered in small capacity at the symposium and tried to rally and advocate to people in my office and get people to go. And actually, I think our firm, on behalf of Diane Hayden, did sponsor symposium and contributed to that effort. That was 2018. And these are issues about equity and inclusion that always hit home for me as a queer person. I've had interesting life experiences where I could understand how it plays out too, if this idea of being belonging versus not. And growing up with my dad being an architect, I actually really avoided architecture. I didn't want to be an architect, even though the young kid I said I did, because I could see a lot of the limitations. And I wasn't sure, how could I make this kind of career for myself and be a part of something bigger and more inclusive, but also just moving away from this model of a single person and their individual genius that really didn't recognize the communities that you serve, the user groups, and of course, all the consultants and all the people that actually come together to make a building in our society. And I just saw these limitations and I was worried about it. So it was really great to connect with Equity by Design and be able to contribute to their efforts and help to move things forward.
How large has the group grown from the group at AIA San Francisco to even the symposium? I feel like it was such an explosive time, because how I got into it is, I think it was an article written or something like that. And I was doing a women architecture series. And then I hit Rosa like this. I do this all the time. I just randomly email strangers. And then she agreed to come on as a presenter. So we had this whole Zoom thing, or I don't know if it WebEx or whatever it was 10 years ago. We ever heard of this virtual thing? And that's how I got involved and I got started. And as related to what everybody else has talked about of leaving the profession, you want to see reflections of yourself, and it wasn't reflecting of oneself. How did you manage this growth over the years?
So I think that's a bit unique about our group is that we're less of a membership entity or even a committee at that, even though we are officially started as a committee, and we kept at that officially, I would say, until the pandemic. But the power of the group was more about networks. It was more about getting the word out. It was the power of the survey work was about building those networks. And we realized that earlier on. It wasn't about this join us as a member, declare your loyalty to us or not. It was really this open tent of sorts, a welcoming tent with unconditional in and out of you want to be part of the first survey or another crazy idea. You have a crazy idea, let's hear it. It was a place of breaking rules of the very constructs that we are fighting against that weren't working for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how it's been fluid, but also how it's become very incredibly ambitious as well. So my recollection of scale was we had 2,000 respondents in the first go around, and it was exponential. It was 2008 and then 16 and incredible. And the demographics that these voices represented were not just regional, they were national and then became international. And for me, I was incredibly humbled to feel like we had created a forum for sharing and for data, and the data then became the basis for our activism. But I was just really humbled by, just as we had started to share with one another how everybody was contributing to this discussion through the survey, and the survey then became the way that we could organize our focus areas in the symposia. What is it that we need to solve for? What are we understanding better? So to me, that's when I felt like we were inclusive, that people really wanted to share data and stories, but the forum of discussion was really what just really inspired me to just take it on. And to know that if that many people are eager for change, that we can affect change. So that was my kind of reflection on scale.
At this meeting that y'all kindly invited me to, that was like the second or third meeting ever, you guys were talking about mission, but you also already had a whole slew of initiatives you were working on, and one was research, and you wanted to know why Bay Area women were leaving the profession. And the early idea was, well, let's ask their bosses. And as this dumb kid, I went, are you sure they're bosses now? Should we ask the individuals? And you guys were like, well, that's interesting. Do you want to figure that out? And so we all became survey researchers by accident, I think. We wrote these questions and did a bunch of the research the first time around. And Rosa reached out to some faculty members at Mills College that she knew, and she got them to be our professional sounding boards. They ran a bunch of the complicated data analysis for us and things like that, and helped us to hone our questions. But we were bootstrapping. It was originally a pretty small project. And then Rosa was a real whiz with social media, and it was supposed to be a Bay Area survey, but Rosa put out a tweet about it, and then it became a national survey by accident at first, essentially. And if you know Rosa, she kept posting. But for us, the survey was always about just trying to learn what people's experiences were. And then the goal was to do analysis on the back end to understand what the patterns were. So for instance, just you as an individual, what are you experiencing in a very complicated way in the field? And then let's figure out whether there are correlations between age or gender or eventually race and sexuality and the kinds of experiences that you're having. And can we uncover some patterns that start to show you that you're not alone? And can you use that data to start a conversation with your boss or your colleague or your husband or your wife or whoever you need to have that conversation with? And so that was always the way that it was. And from there, we started a lot of really great conversations the first time around, and then expanded the survey from there. Ultimately, by the time that we did the third one in 2018, we had like 60 volunteers that participated in focus groups and helped us to vet all of our questions. We had a whole team of people that was doing like a giant lit review so that the survey questions were all validated by actual professional researchers so that we weren't making things up anymore. Whereas the first time around, I think some of our bosses went, well, hey, that's really interesting, but that's biased. By the time we got to the third time around, we were able to say, you know, this is like a fifth of the AIA has participated in this, and we've actually run robust analysis. The other thing I should say in there is that for the second and third time around, we also had the ACSA, so the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, joined us as our teams. And that organization, and especially Kendall Nicholson, who's their Director of Research and Information, and Mike Monty, were just incredible partners who expanded our thinking. They're the ones that, when we said, this isn't really about women in architecture, this is about diversity, equity, justice, inclusion in architecture. And what that means is that we need to look at a lot more facets of identity. And we know it's a harder project. They were there 100% for it. And we're really grateful to them for that.
That was the amazing part of this throughout the years, is that you guys did not stay stagnant. Conversations I had with Rosa, I was always amazed at the amount of books she has read and the information that she's retained and the education. Not just her. I assume everyone on this panel has read tons and tons of books to educate yourselves into different subject matters. It's not just about women. As the surveys continue to grow, just amazing. At what point, now I'm switching over to the political side of it now, burn out. When did that set in? I want to acknowledge that, because again, like the amount of work that you guys have put in year after year after year. Let's talk about that.
I think we had a good, healthy cadence in the beginning where we knew that we couldn't do this giant survey every year. Set the target goal to do every other year, because it was such a large undertaking to collect the data and then to orchestrate and fundraise and put on a symposium and curate it. We did it all. It was crazy as I look back on it. But the momentum and the need was so urgent that I think that adrenaline pushed us. And then on the off years, we would have smaller programming, which the survey still needed time to get to its audience. Part of this off year was like pushing out the data and continuing to share the infographics at panels, being guests at these virtual and in-person events, but also having more intimate workshops of, well, how do we hack the fact that our careers are stagnant? We had figured out, based on the pinch points, we call them different career barriers or times in your career or phenomena that would happen that were commonalities. We would say, okay, low pay, let's just take that. We made a workshop about negotiation skills that needed to be understood. And then we dug deep into all the spectrum of the culture of negotiation and all that. And then we tried to hack it with simulated, just literally people negotiating with each other on these like scenario-based challenges that people have all the time. We had really great, even just career breaks. Jill Bergman, who recently got her fellowship at FAIA, she was one of our guest drop-in people who shared that, hey, every 7 years, I take a sabbatical. We're like, oh my God, never thought of that before. What a revelation. So we asked her to come in and share her career journey. And she actually graphically communicated it with the highs and lows. And when she took a career break, broke up, first marriage, bad, got remarried. It was awesome. It was like this personal roadmap of her life. And it gave us a lot of advancement in thinking differently.
I think along with the cadence, the tightness of the overarching structure of the symposium and the survey together, and then the break year and the events that we would do in between. The first 2 years, we were throwing a ton of things at the wall. Like Annelise said, there were all these ideas. There were lots of people doing lots of different things. And then after the first survey and symposium, it had crystallized into these two things that had a very tight relationship to each other and a structure of how the symposium related to the survey. And I don't think this was intentional, but the structure that we had developed ended up being quite flexible so that we were able to repeat that general relationship and even the kind of structure of the day and the relationship between the survey and the symposium in a way that could expand to include all of these different ideas or these different activities, like Rosa was saying. And that, combined with the big gap year, I think helped us to, one, draw in different people to help with the effort every time and press play on things and bring in new blood and new energy to re-energize all of us and keep things moving while allowing for a lot of variety and new ideas.
So I know that time is of the essence. So what I'm going to do is combine my 2 talking points with some photographs. We're going to walk down memory lane for a little bit. Start off with this one.
Is fun. Yes.
Ah, there it is.
You're gonna make me cry.
So I want to
I
talk
love
about the profession now. Do you think that the numbers have changed as we are looking at for the audio audience? We're one of the 2 poses that came out of that we all know and still do is the power pose. So this is not what the photograph I'm showing now is not the power pose. It's like a jump pose. But needless to say, what do you think the state of women in architecture is now? I know that's kind of be a loaded question, but from the time of the first survey till like now, what are your feelings about the numbers?
Because we haven't surveyed since 2018, and we know that the roller coaster of the pandemic has happened, and there have been seismic shifts, I would say, in the workplace. It's hard to know. We kind of know maybe through articles, sub-articles about the difficulties that did happen during the pandemic. For instance, childcare went away, and magically people thought, well, yeah, that'll just happen by itself. And we're all working virtually, but we still had the parental duties or whatever home obligations that we had without the support.
I actually went and I worked as a consultant with Saskia, focused on these issues for a little while following the birth of my first child. And we have done some industry surveys, but I will say that it's not as broad an audience as what the Equity by Design surveys were. It's not completely parallel, and I don't want to pretend that it is. But what we are seeing in those surveys is that there are still real gaps between men's and women's experiences in the field. There are even starker gaps between the experiences of white men and women of color. And I just want to be really clear about that. I think the revelation for us is that as we've expanded our field, intersectionality is critical to understand in this field. And there are still gulfs in the ways that people experience their careers. But I think that there are also signs that there's been progress. We're seeing more people saying that they're experiencing inclusion in the workplace, for instance. That used to be a serious issue, and it's a lot of people are experiencing inclusion. I think the question now is going to be whether the proof is in the pudding, and are we going to continue to see the profession led by white men 20, 25 years from now, 5 years from now? Or are those numbers going to start changing as people's experiences and as the culture changes? I think we are seeing the culture change, though. So that's promising.
Oh, just to add to that, I would say experientially, I attended the AIA Women's Leadership Summit when it was in San Jose and hosted there. And I hadn't seen a lot of people in a long time because of the pandemic. And that was like one of my first in-person events again in the industry. And I had a lot of people walk up to me to say that they felt the impact of Equity by Design 10 years ago and it changed their life. I never expected people to come up to me to say that, but it reminds me of the fact that even though there are these 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that the longitudinal impact of the work that we did still has a positive upside.
I've switched photos for the audio audience, and the photo that I'm displaying it's the large shot. Is everyone who has participated in the symposium over in what location is this again?
The former Art Institute, San Francisco.
And it's a group shot of everyone participating, and the hands are up for the photography. My question to everyone is, moving forward, I know that AIA is doing the Women's Leadership Summit. I think the goal is to have it every year now. You think that the audience will get larger and larger and larger, or in this political climate? Because again, architecture is political. Do you feel that we are going backwards at all? The state of women versus the state of women in architecture.
My first child was born on June 24th, which is the day that women lost their right to have an abortion in this country. I think it is undoubtable that women's rights are being threatened in the country at the moment. Obviously, I think that we're in a political moment where the pendulum is running the risk of swinging the other way. And we need to be alive to that.
Absolutely. And the queer community as well, and racial groups There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how companies are dropping their DEI initiative or sweeping them under the rug because it's not the popular flavor of the month anymore. And I think diligence and persistence is the key reminder for us. These problems have been around forever and ever. And even with the positive swing of momentum with Black Lives Matters and the formation of these Jedi DEI groups and the conversations, the structural racism, sexism was always there. And I think the focus should be not on who we see as like the Skittles bags of representation, but are we actually dismantling the fundamental structural policies, practices, and barriers themselves? So I've doubled down on that, I think, in the last 2 years, more quietly, but more intentionally within the workplace. Is why is that policy there? It's inherently racist, sexist, preventative of advancement or promotion. Can we change it? And most times it's yes. There is still the pushback and we don't know yet. If we don't ask, we don't get.
Just to maybe tied to the symposia and the scale, but also the importance of change. And in some ways, I don't think size of the congregation is as important as the influence that people can have, which that's really what matters. And I've seen all of us in the last 10 years really double down on our spheres of influence in our studios and through our projects, and just really through behavior change and through actions and outcomes, I just feel like a sense of ownership, accountability, and responsibility are all coming together. And I feel personally able to look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm doing everything that I can in the sphere that I can. And so for me, large gatherings are less important to me than more influence. And so that's my lever these days. And I don't know if that helps, but I feel a lot more satisfaction in saying I extended that influence as best as I could. And I take ownership of that. I've seen all of us really dabble in that regard. And I'm proud of us for that.
I switched photos again for the audio audience and life of an architect. And I think the symposium did a great job in highlighting the realness. And we touched upon this in the beginning too, sharing our stories of wanting to leave the profession at some point in time. I feel like you guys really gave voices to people who couldn't speak, and the stories that others have shared really encouraged everyone and has planted seeds in a lot of people. Do you guys still feel like you want to leave this profession? You went into a meeting and someone encouraged you to stay. Is that same person still encouraging you to stay?
I think it's passing it on to the next gen at this point. What we've learned shouldn't be lost. I think my new aha for this year and the next couple of years is how do we take the tools that we've learned, the persistent skills, the questioning, the dismantling, the disruption, how do we teach that to the next group coming behind us? And how do we pull them up so that they don't have to do the blind figuring it out? Because if we don't do that, then they have to go searching for it like we did. They have to go digging around and find the little missing pieces of everything and put it together. So at the minimum, I think our responsibility is to pass it to the next group. And how we do that is the question.
I still regularly think about leaving the profession, but I'm also going through a really big career transition right now, which I don't really want to talk about. And I still, like the people on this call or people that I will call, probably some of the first people I would call to talk about it, which means a whole lot. But I guess when I think about staying, which I'm probably going to do, I think about, and this is like what Lillian said, the practice. I think at this point, after 10 years, and we started with what Annelise and Rosa were talking about, like, how do you just stay in the office? How do you have a kid and get to come back? How do you not go crazy or get angry at your boss every day because of things they're saying or things they're not letting you do or what have you? And then over the years, it slowly expanded to get to talk and collaborate with all these amazing people who were doing really exciting initiatives like you, Melissa, or like people who are Brian in New Orleans, or people who are doing alternate forms of practice or really getting out in the community and making projects happen that I never heard about when I was in school that are still few and far between. And so I guess I would say that the desire to do this and to really be connected and inclusive and political and look for justice, the more that we can wrap that into the project work as well, the more it seems inspiring to me to try to stay and to then look to younger people and really tell them that we still think it's worth it and that they can have an influence and they can find other people who are worth working with and who will see them and recognize them and help them grow themselves as professionals. Thanks.
Love you, Julia.
Thanks.
I know.
I love you too.
I did a podcast interview with Caitlin, and one of the things I've been saying or talking about is that I no longer participate in women in architecture. I'm more holed into Black women in architecture. But the reason why is that I feel like it has become more performative. I feel like that we're doing a lot of celebrations. And listen, I'm all about the celebrations. I'm all about the positive, uplifting things. But the issues, especially what the pandemic exposed and post-pandemic, what that has exposed, we're not talking about it in a community. For example, during COVID, you had women as caretakers, not only for their kids, but also for their parents or for themselves and stuff. And then post pandemic, you have returned to office where you finally had a balance, a work-life balance. And now, nope, sorry, you have to go back. No hybrid. You have to come back 5 days a week. I feel like those discussions aren't being had. And that's why I left. I feel like I've learned so much, not learned, but my vocabulary, because now I was going to say change agent. And I learned that from you guys. I learned the word change agent from you guys. I don't want to take that burden on, because that's another thing too. And I think that also feeds back to my question about burnout, because I'm very self-aware of what I can handle, and to carry on women in architecture core issues is not one of them. I want to get you guys feedbacks on what I just said.
Yes.
I want to keep it brief so everybody can chime in, but just very succinctly, I think that's why we've always avoided the moniker women in architecture intentionally, because we wanted to create the bigger tent and we wanted to push the critical thinking on what we should care about. And unfortunately, with the tragedies of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, we had to raise the awareness of justice bravely and in its different definition from courthouses and such, but the true meaning of justice, which is saying it loud of what the historic racism has been and dismantling it. And we can see the resistance now, but I'm not going to stop saying justice. I'm not going to stop saying we need design justice. I'm not going to stop saying intersectionality. And we need to push the boundaries of inclusive to belonging and dignity. I'll never stop pushing the limits. I won't get comfortable because it's too important. And it is tough to go to these events because I still want to support the momentum. I don't want to say outright, I'm not about that. But when I do go to those events and I do notice it's majority white women, and I do notice that there might be the performative token Black women in architecture or other underrepresented groups to say we check the box, we have the United Colors of Benetton, I get very frustrated. And then the topic matter is repetitive to what we were talking about 10 years ago.
I agree with you, Melissa. I think that going back to the 10-year retrospective theme, Equity by Design started at about the time that Lean In came out. And 10 years, I don't think Equity by Design was ever about Lean In feminism. I think it was about people getting together to change systems, as opposed to people getting together to figure out how to advance their own interests and the interests of their friends. And 10 years later, we can't be doing Lean In feminism. I think it glosses over things and it gets in the way of real change. And what I was saying earlier, the statistics, white women are doing better in our field than they were doing 10 years ago. That's not what we were working towards. And so our project isn't done yet.
I think on the topic, kind of thinking back about the pandemic and it raised a kind of general awareness. And then also for us as a group, we focused on the JEDI Agenda and Action Series, focusing on the health, the environment, practice, and the economic aspect. So trying to think beyond architecture and connect ourselves more to society and community and the reality of these systemic issues that affect us, whether we recognize it or not, how much privilege or power you have in the scale as a person, whether you're white or you have economic, educational privilege, et cetera, and recognizing the differences that kind of transforms and affects us intersectionally. And then that's really what the work is. It's focused on that and then how the policies and practices come to play, especially in the field. And I think with firms, they've gotten into a comfortable zone where we just celebrate History Month for this group, History Month for that group. It's Pride Month this month. Oh, we're going to rainbow wash. And it's just like greenwashing. It's a lot of that feel-good stuff. And it's great to celebrate like you're talking about. But at the end of the day, it doesn't leave you with much. I don't think people grasp or understand that we really need to look at the policies and practices and really check the bias. We all have biases. We all have our own experiences that we draw from and that the lens in which we look at things, as open-minded and curious as we try to be in this group and in our network. I think we just need to keep that ball moving and try to be pushing the envelope beyond architects and our little sphere of comfort. Because I do think there's been a lot of backsliding because of the pandemic and a lot of awareness regarding the limitations of where we are. So as far as we've come, like it slid back and now it feels a little bit stagnant to me. Kind of like we've made a lot of progress on awareness, but then I'm not sure if people who are not tapped into that are getting it, like on, as you say, beyond just, okay, let's continue the women leadership thing, but like how do we keep making it expansive and actually doing something that's beyond performative?
Lillian?
I think we all want to feel like there has been effective change and sustained change, but yeah, it's a little tough sometimes to recognize the challenges are still there. And the question is, how do you avoid burnout? And for me, I think this year of us all coming back to potentially different scenarios is the moment to affect change the most, because we went from the extreme of everybody is distributed, maybe there's a hybrid, and there's a lot of room for interpretation. So when I see ourselves in positions to be able to affect more clarity towards what's effective, then I want us to get that energy back. I feel like we've taken a break a little bit, and now it's time for our voices to really double down and not slide, as Rosa mentioned, and to have the wider lenses, and Tania mentioned, and to say, yeah, I have my own set of experiences, as Annelise now has, with, experiencing a brighter set of circumstances. So I think we're just broader, deeper, and more able. And that's where my head's at, is yes, let's reshape, because this is the year where I feel like that change could be effective. If we let it slide, it's going to be back to, we haven't made any change. So I'm more leaning into this moment. I feel like I've recharged and I'm ready to go. So
Oh, wow. I like
hopeful.
that.
I'm hopeful.
That's hopeful. Yes.
Hopeful.
That's hopeful. Moving forward, I guess. You guys ever thought about getting the band back together or dusting off some old surveys to just throw out there, get into that research? Like, yummy. You guys are interested in that at all?
I think at this point, I believe that happy architects that work in a place where they are treated with dignity and where they experience belonging and where the systems that govern their work are just, I think they produce better buildings. But I think we've gotten ourselves to a point where we're really thinking about how architects are instrumental in society and how we're actually creating spaces that dismantle some of these systems that we're talking about, or at least help to.
Yes.
And we haven't figured out how to research that yet. So stay tuned. And if you have any good ideas, let's talk, because we'd like to, but it's going to look really different than what we've done before, I think.
Yeah, and I think the shift is towards the work. I spent the last 7 years making that parallel shift while we were still doing a lot of the tail end of the survey and the outreach. But I can safely reflect that we're into the next space. We're intentionally using just design processes to get the largest stakeholder voices, especially the historically unheard, to the table. And in the context of higher education and students being the most vulnerable, and students of color and these intersectional identities. And so we've doubled down on that and getting them to the table. And I feel like we're starting to see the project outcomes, and we're starting to get researchers at these institutions interested in doing that next level of survey that Annelise, you mentioned, doing the broader interview, anecdotal research with the students? Is it actually helping them that they asked for an extra study space with more plug points, a place to nap, and some food nearby? Is it helping them to graduation, to form stronger relationships, to find meaning, to get out of the dystopian doom cycle? That's our hope. That's that future ready resilience. And we haven't figured out how to measure it yet, but I feel like we're on that next wave of design justice work. And it is building momentum. And we are getting our firms to pay more attention because they're seeing the value proposition of connecting to our communities and connecting to the most vulnerable. I'm really excited about that. And maybe we'll get the band back together and talk about the work. And then we could pass the survey of the profession part to the interested parties and help them, because I know that the LGBTQIA group has reached out to us about how do they do a survey. And I would love to pass on the secret sauce and see somebody else take it to another level that we weren't able to do.
I am curious about pandemic numbers. Did we start all over again? I am curious about that. Maybe somebody can do that. I'm throwing that out there. Any last words, thoughts?
Grateful for you, Melissa, and your podcast.
Oh, thank you. I was like,
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. Again, the conversation I was having with Caitlin, I mentioned equity by design. I was like, wait a minute. And I went back to my archives and I was like, oh, 2014. Do we have an exact date? Did it pass? Did it happen? Is it 14?
It's actually technically 2013 when we started the committee, but you are correct in that the survey itself was launched in 2014. And that's when it got on the map, so to speak, right? Because before that, we were just a bunch of people meeting and talking and ideating. But when we put the survey out, we actually had a there. I think you could say that 2014 was the launch year and 2013 was the, hey, I think we want to do something. We don't really know what it is and we have to figure it out. It was a lot of that storming.
On that note, we're about to end.
No, give her the last word.
To you guys, thank you. You really changed my career. You guys really have. Even with Lillian and how she just took charge and was like, okay, let's do a round robin and pass it. That just brought back memories. The Archie speak or the Archie equity by design speak just flew out of everyone. And I was just like, oh, Jedi, like hackathon, like this is all equity by design. Like I still have my Eat the Whale t-shirt in there somewhere. It's part of my pen. I still have the pin, PIN. I still have those. I have a box. I think I just grabbed like a handful.
Like coins.
I still have those things and it's part of my adulthood. You guys are part of my architecture careerhood.
I've got a new word for you.
Oh, what?
For 2024. Propinquity. Propinquity, which means kinship or forming bonds based on your adjacency or connectedness. And I think of the old phrase, blood is thicker than water, but it doesn't mention the deeper meaning. Blood is thicker than the water of the womb, which means that blood covenants or intentional promises or bonds that you make are stronger than sometimes your birthright or your connectedness through family. And I feel like this is so true of this group as a chosen family, that we fought hard and we chose each other and we chose the last 10 years to continue to work together, not paid, through our volunteerism and through friendship and through belonging and connection. And you're part of that bigger family too, Melissa, for sure, in that chosen family. And the propinquity is a reminder of what we lost during the pandemic and what we have yet to gain back, which is holding space, kin making, kinship based on our connectedness and our adjacencies. even if we can't physically be together sometimes.
Virtual hugs.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Mel.
Thanks for tuning in to Architecture's Political Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it informative or at least entertaining. If you like what you heard, please share with others. You can also connect with Arcus Poly on social media, currently on Instagram as well as Facebook and Twitter. For more information, visit us on our website. It's arcuspoly.online, ARCHIPOLLY.online. I also want to thank our loyal supporters who have been with this podcast for at least 3 years. It means the world to me, and I'm totally grateful to have you part of this community. I will try to bring you the best content as possible, and I can't wait to share more amazing episodes with you. If this is your first time listening, or just like a particular episode, or all of them, you can support this podcast by going on glow.fm/ArcusPoly. Again, thank you for your support. It means the world to me, and thank you so much for listening.